such a deeper conversation that has to happen in America about what your police department is supposed to do and what they're responsible for. And changing that culture is going to be a long road, but I'm just lucky that Baltimore's ahead of the game.
There can be few more challenging jobs in American city-level politics than being the mayor of Baltimore. It is not entirely Baltimore's fault that it has become synonymous with gun crime and urban blight. The success of the tremendous television series The Wire did little good for the image of the city in which it was set. But it is also true that The Wire was set in Baltimore for a reason. As recently as 2019, there were more murders in Baltimore, population just 500,000 or so, than in New York City. That is changing on the watch of Baltimore's current mayor, Brandon Scott. Elected in 2020, re-elected in 2024, and still only 40, Scott has presided over a decline in gun crime in particular. A new documentary, The Body Politic, looks at how he is doing it and the challenges of persuading voters to stay the course. I'm Andrew Mueller, and I spoke to Mayor Brandon Scott for The Big Interview. Mayor Scott of Baltimore, welcome to The Big Interview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
I want to start by going back to a moment earlier this year when obviously Baltimore made global news for reasons you would have preferred it not to. I'm interested in those first moments when a crisis strikes, and I'm talking, of course, about the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge back in March. How are you told about that as mayor? How does that call come through, and what do you do in the minutes and hours afterwards?
Well, unfortunately, it's the mayor is normally one of the first people that gets the call, so I will run you through it. It's something I will never forget, obviously. But my son, my son Charm, named after Charm City, who turns one on December the 26th, was just 3 months old. It happened basically the night or early morning after my State of the City speech. So I got home around like 9:30, 10 o'clock, and for some reason, he would not go down that night. So he finally went to sleep around like 1:15. I remember just taking a shower and then getting in the bed, and it's like literally as soon as my head hit the pillow, basically the fire chief called me, my fire chief, Chief Wallace, and said, "Sir, the Key Bridge is gone. It's in the water." And I said, "Repeat that?" He said, "A container ship hit it. It's in the water." And I just said, "I'm on my way. Where are you?" And he told me where he was. And then, to be honest, because we've been through so much, I've had a block of houses explode twice, lost firefighters in a really bad fire. We've had underground fires and explosions. This is my 18th year in City Hall. So I've been through a lot of emergencies and spent a lot of time in our emergency situations and our emergency center. That it just muscle memory kicked in. So I got off the phone with him, called the governor, called the Senate president, started calling people as I was en route once my team got to me and picked me up en route to the scene, which was, of course, just devastating. When I got there, you could still hear like the iron shifting.
At that early stage, though, what are you thinking about how you're going to communicate to the people of Baltimore, how you're going to talk them through this? Because obviously the loss of a bridge it's an economic calamity and it's a logistical calamity, but that's a bridge that means more than those things. It's a symbol of the city.
Well, I think that first and foremost, and I don't know if you guys saw this over in the UK, but first and foremost, when in those first moments, this wasn't about the bridge. This was about those lives. And if we had people that we could get out in the water, we had divers in the water in dangerous, very dangerous conditions looking for those 6 workers. And I had to remind a reporter shortly thereafter who, during our first press update, asked me, "Oh, how much is it going to cost to rebuild the bridge and how long will it take?" And just remind him that we shouldn't even be thinking about that right now because we have people that we're searching for, and that had to come first. So that was the first portion, making sure that folks understood first that this was a human tragedy and we would deal with the bridge later, and the importance of the port. because that port isn't just important to Baltimore or to Maryland. It's important to the country and the world, right? When you think about that in the U.S., it is the number one port for roll on, roll off, and that's not just automobiles, right? That's tractors and farm equipment. In fact, some of the farm equipment that we've all seen on the news pulling Russian tanks off of streets in Ukraine came from Baltimore's port. And I think that we had to remind folks of that importance, and we had to go and change to that operation of trying to get the port back open and reminding people the importance of not just the bridge but the port.
In the days afterwards, though, how strange was it for you to find yourself not just a major municipal figure, which obviously the mayor of any city is, but a national figure and an international figure? And I'm asking especially about the attacks that came with it. I'm sure you have to have a pretty thick skin to go into politics at any level, but given some of what rained down upon you and Governor Wes Moore, a lot of it, really quite flagrantly racist. How easy or difficult did you find tuning that level of abuse out?
Well, I mean, I'm used to it. Unfortunately, in my country and the world, that comes with the territory. This wasn't the first time that I was thrust into the national spotlight. I had that happen as a young city council member during the unrest after Freddie Gray, and multiple times since then. But as a younger black man, I know that that's going to come, and I actually revel in that because I want to be the person that proves those people wrong and calls them out about it. A lot of times, folks that are in a position like mine, they'll shy away from calling things out as racist and saying all of these things. Like when people, call us the N word online or say that I was the DEI mayor. Yeah, I said, yeah, you're right that I am. I'm the duly elected incumbent mayor of the city of Baltimore. And we have to make sure that we call those people out because the reason why those folks do what they do is because they think that they can just hide on the internet, and they think they can just hide and people won't say anything or call them out. But you have to call that out in order to not just let people know how wrong it is, but to show people how wrong they are about who you are and what you're truly capable of.
And it's a question I've asked a lot of politicians because I think it is something that politicians of all kinds, of all political persuasions in all countries now have to grapple with, that a lot of the instant feedback they get on social media is this unpleasant, and it's obviously worse for people of colour, it's obviously worse for women and members of other minorities, but nonetheless, everybody cops it. Is it always possible just to rise above it? I mean, politicians are only human. Do you ever have days where you absorb this stuff and just think, what am I doing?
No, I don't. Because I think it comes from my upbringing, right? I think when I know what my family, my dad's family, for example, comes from a small portion of North Carolina where my grandparents worked on a pig farm. My mom's family's from rural Virginia, coming from a similar situation, and knowing the history of my family, especially deeply on my dad's side, that it would be disrespectful to me and to give up and let those people win. That they can't say anything to me online or do anything to me that they didn't do or try to do to my ancestors. So my job is to take the next generation further and know that it's not just about me, it's about that name that I wear on my back and the people whose shoulders that I stand on, and that if I go through something and handle it the right way, the next young black man from Baltimore, the next young person who's elected to this office or any other will understand that they might not have to go through it. Doesn't get to me at all.
Well, let's talk a bit about that upbringing, because the documentary that brings you to this program is the Body Politic, which does reflect on your political career. And one of the early sequences is you launching your campaign to become mayor of Baltimore in Park Heights, which is the neighborhood you grew up in. And as you explained, it is quite a rough neighborhood of what is quite a lot of the time quite a rough city. When you were growing up, though, did it seem just hopelessly violent to you? How did you relate to the violence that surrounded you? Did it just seem like part of the weather, or from even an early stage, was there a sense you had of it, maybe it doesn't have to be like this?
Well, it was the question of why it was like. I was very acutely aware of how frequent it happened because it happened outside of my door consistently, right?
Hmm.
The reason I ran for office is goes back to the first time I witnessed a shooting. I was outside playing basketball, literally 20 seconds from my house in this church lot that we use for basketball, football, baseball, everything. And someone started shooting and had to duck into the bushes, and I wasn't even I was before my 10th birthday. I was like 7 or 8 years old. And remember asking everybody, my uncles, my aunts, my parents, my grandparents, my older cousins, like why this happened, and no one cared. And my mom one day said, if you wanted to change, you're gonna have to change it. No one's coming to save us. And I was acutely aware of it, but I also had this flip side of my upbringing where I would spend my summers down in North Carolina, down in Virginia, in places that didn't have the violence. So I knew that it wasn't just the normal everywhere, and wanted to see that peace. And also, just, I don't know if this was what I was just blessed with, but had this sense of understanding of what I wanted better for everyone else, especially my friends who had less than me and my family, and seeing the things that they went through. I just wanted Baltimore to be better for all of us because I know how much it provided for my family, but I know that it also just had so many things going on.
You first ran for elected office as a city councillor really quite young. You were still in your 20s. I'm just wondering, given the circumstances in which you'd grown up and given the failures that generations of Baltimoreans had witnessed of politicians to be able to address this stuff, why did you still have any amount of faith that, electoral politics can actually fix this?
Well, I think it's that when you think about if anybody or any type of person or generation was going to be able to enact change in Baltimore from a political and a point of view, it's someone like me who grew up in a neighborhood like Park Heights, who was quite honestly who was black, who experienced the backside of all the failed policies like zero tolerance or policing while black was what we called it in our neighborhoods, who went through all the schools with no heat and air conditioning, who witnessed all the bad things. Who better than me? Who went out, survived all of that, went and got my degree, came to City Hall, because what I think some folks miss is that when I first ran for election, wasn't I was already 4 years in working in City Hall, having worked for a former council president and former mayor. Who better than me? And I think that it was time for Baltimore to have one of its own sons be a part of that change making process. And I believed in myself, and I believed in the power of my community.
By the numbers, you have had quite considerable success with reducing homicides and shootings. The numbers I saw suggested that early December 2024, homicides were down from 243 to 185 year on year. Non-fatal shootings down 590 to 392, which is a great place to have arrived at, given that you start out campaigning for mayor talking about gun violence as a disease we have been unable to cure. Obviously not cured yet, but what are you discovering about what actually does work?
So I think that, and this is very detailed in the body politic. I think that we know what works, and we knew what worked. And what has happened in my city, but really across America, is that we have tried to treat gun violence, this disease of gun violence, by treating one symptom or just attacking it one way, solely through the lens of policing. And that was a
Mm.
failed strategy because never, never should we have ever put the full responsibility of reducing gun violence and preventing gun violence on the backs of our police officers. They have a role to play in it, a very big role to play in it, in all of our communities. But it wasn't their sole responsibility. And I think that what I have done now is have a comprehensive approach where we bring everybody to the table and we focus, right? I think the body politic lays this out for people very clearly and bluntly. You can actually get the body politic in the UK on kinema.com, but and on PBS in the States. But I think when you understand strategies that have been proven to work, and you have the executive level leadership that invest in it, you can see that change happen rapidly, right? So we said that we were going to do it this way. I came outside and said that I was going to reduce homicides by 15% from one year to the next. And people laughed at me as we were building our group violence reduction strategy, where we identify the people who are the most likely to be the victim of the perpetrator of gun violence, right? We don't just say everyone that's black that lives in this neighborhood that's standing outside is a criminal. We find out who those groups of people are and we focus on them. They actually get a letter directly from me that says, I know who you are, I know what you do. This is your last chance to change your life. We'll help you with anything that you need: education, housing, training, whatever. But if you don't take our help, we will put you in jail through law enforcement. And if they do, we help them. If they don't, then we remove them. And that has been proven to work. When you throw that on top of our focus on guns themselves, going after gun traffickers, we've been able to go after gun companies like Polymer 80, the ghost gun company, and sue and win and stop their business in the state of Maryland. We've been able to also break down these criminal organizations at the same time while we're using our community violence intervention workers and growing that ecosystem where we pay people, including folks that I grew up with in Park Heights, who used to be the people shooting, dealing the drugs, etc., to now go out and intercede in these conflicts that can turn into violent conflicts very quickly, right? They mediate these things through our Safe Streets program and our other violence intervention work. All of that together is how we last year had the largest single year reduction of 20% that Baltimore has ever seen, and we have a 23% reduction on top of that this year.
Nevertheless, as mayor, have you found yourself thinking differently about any aspects of policing? You say in the film yourself that you've been on this trajectory from being a victim of zero tolerance policing to commander-in-chief of the Baltimore Police Department. You supported reductions in police funding while you were on the council, but you've increased them again as mayor. Was that a kind of a brush with reality there?
No, I think that what gets lost sometimes in the media is the reality of what I did as the council president. Uh, what I did as the council president and reducing their budget actually benefited the department in ways of having officers on the street. But also, it was a fiscal responsibility move. It just happened at the time of quote unquote defund the police. So, what I'll say to you is very simple. BBC is not going to allow your radio show to have $12 million in this budget that's unallocated that you nor your producer or anyone that works at the station know what it's being spent for. That's what I cut from the police department's budget was unallocated millions of unallocated funds that no one knew what it was being spent for, even including the police commissioner. We ended the mounted unit where folks were just police were riding on horses only in certain neighborhoods at certain times, and we put those people back in the street into our patrol units who according to our federal consent decree monitors is where we should be focusing our officers anyway. And when you think about those increases, they are just what we call cost of living increases. They're not increasing in staff, etc. We're going to continue to fund our police department because we know we need our police department, but we're also going to be smarter about how we spend our money and invest in other areas at the same time. This was never a either or for me. It was always a both and.
How difficult is it, though, I guess, changing the culture of a police department and how it projects itself? Because to most people outside the United States, the spectacle of the American police, not just in Baltimore but elsewhere, rolling through town in vehicles that most European countries really only issue to their armies, is just completely bizarre. Do you think that is part of the problem, the fact that they do present more like an occupying army than servants of the citizens?
Yeah, that I think for us, we are many years into changing that culture following the death of Freddie Gray and the unrest,
Hmm.
and obviously our consent decree, because it was a warrior mentality, and now we're at a guardian mentality. And when you think about, for example, when you saw the unrest after George Floyd and how city after city after city were catching fire in America, you didn't have that in Baltimore because essentially we had been through that before, and we as a city had learned and our police department had learned how to properly deal with that. If you would have said to me, a young Brandon Scott on the city council, or even before then, right? 10 years ago, if you're interviewing me and saying that in 10 years, cities across the country are going to be sent to Baltimore by the White House and DOJ to study how to police in communities, I would have laughed at you. But that's what happens now, right? Because we've evolved so much, but we still have so far to go. But it's also, I think, it's deeper than just changing the culture of policing. It's also changing the culture of American culture and our city's cultures, right? Because what has happened is people have now grown up in this culture where folks expect that they can call 911 for anything they don't like, and the police department comes running, right? And we see this all over. Actually, this is featured prominently on another documentary that I was a subject in, Charm City, before the Body Politic, where people, if they a band, kids, marching band is practicing outside their house and they're like, they call 911, right? 80% of the calls when I got into office that were coming into the emergency 911 number were non-emergency. And I think that we get into this position in the United States where people think the police are the end all be all to all problems, and also that they're like, for example, we have these issues when our police job is to go out and, at my direction, make arrests and prevent crime and stop people and hold them accountable when they do. But they are not the judge, the jury, or the state's attorney. When someone's released, it's not because the police. It's such a deeper conversation that has to happen in America about what your police department is supposed to do and what they're responsible for. And changing that culture is going to be a long road, but I'm just lucky that Baltimore's ahead of the game.
I'm glad you mentioned the White House because obviously from January 20th it will have a new occupant, and it's far from unimaginable that at some point he will come for you because he has come for Baltimore before. Do you have a plan for how you would respond if and when President Trump decides to make you the villain of the hour?
Well, I think that, look, I've been there before, right? So I would hope that the president elect and his followers would understand is that the things that they say outwardly that they want to do, we're already doing, right? I would hope that they would recognize that, oh, Baltimore is now having the largest reductions of violence that the city has ever seen, 2 years in a row. And why would they come and disrupt that apple cart? I would hope that they see Baltimore has $7 billion will be of investment coming just into our downtown. They wouldn't disrupt that. I would hope that he sides with the folks from the House Appropriations Committee who visited us after the Key Bridge and understand the importance of rebuilding that bridge. But if not, we will be ready to defend Baltimore and our progress in any way possible.
And if they want to make dramatic gestures about rounding up illegal immigrants, would that be something you would attempt to avoid cooperating with?
I said this very clearly. If we're talking about continuing to round up people who are here illegally from other countries who are committing acts of violence and trafficking guns or people or all the things that they're committing crimes, we will be standing there ready to help and aid in that. But what we won't be doing is taking our police officers from focusing in on continuing reducing violence, saving lives in ways that have never been done in this city to simply round up immigrants. That makes no sense for us as a city, and it really makes no sense for us as a country. But when we're talking about criminals, we'll be there to support in every way. But people who are just working and going about their day, my police officers will stay focused on removing people who are shooting people, who are trafficking guns, who are murdering people, robbing people, carjacking people.
Nevertheless, do you see anywhere in the re-election of Donald Trump any kind of opportunity for the Democratic Party? Do you think or have any hope it might create more spaces in which more progressive politics can actually flourish while Donald Trump leads his portion of the country wherever it is he wants to lead it?
Well, I think that for my party, it's really a time to really have a deep inner look. And what I hope for my party is it's less about progressive or mid-level democratic politics, but it's more about the people and how we're talking to the people and what messages we're sending to them, what priorities we're focusing on, and what messengers. Right? I think that this is a time where my hope is that the party leans in on those of us at the local level who are the closest to the people, who the people relate to the most, who the people can see when they're picking their kids up from school or in the supermarket, who know that the things that impact their local elected officials, that they lift us up, and that we have this discussion about getting back to focusing on the people and the basics and the things that matter to everyday Americans.
I mean, on that subject, are there any particular policies you're working on or hoping to implement in the next few years which excite you beyond crime reduction? I know that you recently ran a pilot program for guaranteed income. What did you take away from that?
That it works, and we knew that already, but we had to prove it. I'm one of dozens of mayors around the country who have now successfully had a guaranteed income pilot program. Have to give shout out to my good friend and brother, former Mayor Michael Tubbs, who led us in that effort. But we know it works. We know it works in countries around the world. We're just hoping to one day convince our federal government that it works. We have to remind our Republican friends that it was Richard Nixon that almost passed it in the United States of America, not a Democratic person. But we want to continue things like that because when there's a floor, you give people some sense of security that prevents some of the many ills that we see in American society from happening. But we also here in Baltimore, in addition to historically reducing violence in our city, we have a huge vacant housing problem in our city. We reduced that by 17%. But now, in my second term, we're going to be implementing a $3 billion plan that we're setting out for the next 15 years to reduce and end that problem. That's the next big policy thing that we're going to be focused on heavily.
I have a couple of very specifically Baltimore related questions for you. One is about the TV program I'm sure people ask you about a lot, this being The Wire. Do you feel like that did Baltimore more harm than good? Because it's obviously fantastic television, but it didn't necessarily depict the most flattering view of the city.
Well, I think it just misses. It shows not just The Wire, but Homicide, Life on the
Hmm.
Street, The Corner, all of them just show one side of Baltimore. And I think that what happens is, I say to people like this all the time, when folks think about New York, they don't think about like the 20 versions of Law and Order or New York Undercover or NYPD Blue. They think about all the other positive shows and things that have happened there, right? But for us, we only have shows that show the negative side. And I think that while it was great TV, it was great storytelling. It told stories that were absolutely positively true. And I love the show myself. As someone who lives in the city, if I had a dollar for every time that someone asked me about the show, we wouldn't be talking right now. I'd be on the island somewhere. But my big gripe is that it did not show because that show could have very well told stories like mine, and there's hundreds of thousands of others who grew up here like me over the years that are successful in living their life, and there's so many great people in great neighborhoods in this city consistently who are doing great things, and the city has been changing. Much of my lifetime, and I think that that's what's been missing. Maybe one day I have to create my own show.
Well, I'll ask you in closing about some of those other stories then, because I'm asking as somebody who, to my irritation, has never yet been to Baltimore myself. I do hope to correct that one day, but
Yeah, we got to change that.
we absolutely do. But if we have people listening who are thinking they would like to go to the United States, they might only have a few days, they'd like to visit somewhere on the East Coast. What's your case for Baltimore ahead of New York City or Philadelphia or Washington, D.C.?
When you come to Baltimore, you're going to get the best American city you can get. We call it the greatest city in America. for a reason. You're going to get the charm, and the people are the reason why you want to come to Baltimore, because the people here are authentically Baltimore. When you think about this small but mighty city, you have to think about the history of this country, right? When you think about education and having integrated school systems, you would not have that in the United States of America were it not for a little black boy who grew up in Baltimore called Thurgood Marshall, right? When you think about the United States itself in the war in 1812, and you think about the national anthem, it was written near where the Key Bridge collapsed by Francis Scott Key. It would not have happened if it not for this place. Frederick Douglass, in the time he spent here. When you think about this city, the power, the history of this city that it has in the civil rights music movement, when you think about that, on top of us being close to DC, where you can get there in 30 minutes by train and back, right? And not have to deal with the traffic, but also get a real city where people that live in the city are from that city. You get the best seafood and crabs you can in the world. You can check out a Orioles game, a Ravens game. You can be down at the Inner Harbor. You will get the best of the best, but the most important thing that you will get is authentic, charming Baltimoreans.
Mayor Brandon Scott, thank you for joining us on The Big Interview. That's it for this edition of The Big Interview. It was produced by Gunnar Grunlid and edited by Hunter Wang. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller. Thanks very much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.